Hello and welcome. Today's video will be going over the disassembly, diagnosis, and repair of the Starbase Defense Gun. I think that's what you call it. Anyways, let's remove the 3 screws that hold the toy together and pull it apart, and let's see what we can find. Inside we have a intersecting gear for the oscillation of the base of this defense gun, a metal plate which activates the motor itself with oscillating cannon mounts. It looks like it's on a type of linkage tied to the gear. So there's 2 places that the motor is tied together to this toy. Main axle, and it looks like there's linkage tying it to gear 2 inside the gearbox. Very interesting setup. It looks like this gearbox needs to have a lot of torque to power all these things at once, which is the oscillating of the cannon base, which is done by this yellow axle. If I can figure out how to put it together, because I wasn't looking when I tore it apart. Okay, so that must go there. Very interesting. And this plate goes inside like this, and then that must go over it. Okay, so then the motor goes in like this. I'm just getting a rough idea of how it all fits together. That way, when I put it back together, I won't have so much trouble. Also, I'm getting a better understanding how it all works. For me, it looks like it's going to be a lot of fatigue on this motor to operate so many different things at a time. Usually, as you've seen me take apart other toys, these motors only operate one thing at a time. This time it's operating 2 things at a time. Very interesting setup. Okay, let's get down to the repair. Okay, putting some things aside, let's take out the base and this axle for the oscillating base and the linkage with plate. And also, okay, let's take a look at this motor. The motor has a bent axle coming out of gear 2 from inside. And also there's a large driver gear with a clamp on the other side of that main axle, on the side where the winding handle is, or winding knob. And I'm having a bit of a dilemma whether I can take off the large driver gear or do I have to cut the clamp. And if I cut the clamp, I'm going to have to mark it somehow so I know that I'm kind of close to where it's supposed to be, so it interacts well with the axle for the oscillating base of this toy. So hopefully I can get that done. I'm gonna grab some pliers and try and see if I can remove this driver gear. And it just so happens it's got the best glue in the world and it's not gonna come off. Okay, well, I'm just gonna have to cut the clamp because I'm not gonna be able to take off that driver gear without breaking it somehow. Yep. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that clamp. There's no other way. Alright, so I'm going to make a mark right above the clamp with the snips there and then cut off the clamp. Now again, my only reason for doing this is because I can't take off that driver gear. It's on there in such a way that if I were to apply more force with some sort of plier, I'd end up ruining that driver gear, and it defeats the purpose of fixing this gearbox. So after reviewing everything, and yep, it just slips right off. That S-spring gear needs to be replaced, and also that main gear off of the axle, or the main axle. So I guess we'll have to pick out a replacement S-spring with main gear. And there's that gear 2 with the bent axle. It's a little tricky. It was a little tricky taking it off with the bent axle. It's going to be even more tricky putting it back together with the bent axle and all these little gears I have to put together with it. So I'm thinking about picking out a gearbox. I know I say this before, you know, the toys that hop or the toys that roll or the toys that walk. So the toys that hop have a very simple gearing system. There's the main gear, and then there's, I believe, gear 2 or gear 3 in it. And those gearboxes just go ahead and release all the energy they can when you wind them up. So they don't reduce motion. That's up to how the toy is set up, that it hops. So every time the toy hops, it releases the energy, but it doesn't do it from the motor. The motor is only there to provide the energy, not reduce it in this particular instance, and that's the way it's geared up. So rather than take apart one of the toys that roll or walk, I'd rather do the toy that hops because it has less gears in it that don't really reduce or maintain a constant flow of energy when they're wound up. So this is my choice for this repair. So after hammering out the new S-spring gear from its original axle, I'm going to go ahead and pressure fit it onto the original axle for this toy from its original gearbox. And since I need the ears to face me, um, I need to be careful as I'm putting it in. So I've put it in as usual as far as I could go with my fingers, and now I need to use a flat end screwdriver and applying pressure on one side just gently in between the ears, push it down until I can see that mark. I'm also trying to find the mark where I had put on the axle so I know how far to push down that S-spring gear, and that way I don't go too far when I'm pushing it down. That way I can leave it there and it'll be exactly where I need it. Okay, I think I'm good. So let's go ahead and start the assembly of the gearbox. Oops. Well, excuse me for not correcting the video camera angle. I received a phone call and then the phone continued to record but in the wrong angle. So for a little bit it'll be in this angle and then it'll correct to the original one. So here I'm putting it together. This, if I can get that C gear in there. This is almost comical. Anyways, here I'm going to put in the housing divider, and it's just really tricky trying to get it in there with this bent axle that's coming out of gear 2. So the way I figured out how to do this better is if you angle the bent axle to either the right or left of the housing and then slip it on, that worked very well for me, as you can see here. And then for the tricky part, since both both holes for the spring housing cover to go on, once I get the spring on here, and you'll see that both holes are roughly the same size, so I kind of had to push it in with my finger a little bit to help it along, and then kind of wiggle it, the spring cover, the housing spring cover on there until I got it on correctly. It took some doing, but and some of the gears fell out too, so I had to replace those again. Jeez Louise. But I got it. Okay, now we have a working gearbox. Let's start with the assembly of the toy and let's see how it works. So the first step is going to be I'm going to go ahead and mount those linkages to the gearbox, to the axle that's coming out of gear 2, the bent axle. I'm going to mount those oscillating gear mounts onto the gearbox axle out of gear 2, and then I'm going to place the whole thing into the toy. And for some reason it's not to my liking. Don't know what's going on there. Am I doing it wrong? Something's not right. Hmm. So, hmm. Need some more lighting. Let's try this again. I see. I can feel. Oh, I got. Okay, I see. It doesn't go straight in. It goes in at like an angle. I got it. Okay, that's what was wrong. There's even a groove there for the wedge-shaped bottom end of the gearbox that it fits into. Okay. All right. Nice. So that's how that yellow axle interacts there. We'll put in the linkage with metal plate on there, and that interacts with gear, or the C gear, the caging gear on the gearbox. Making sure it's in there well, and that's okay. And that's the way it should look when you put it together. You got to make sure that washer from the base is on the outside of the toy when you're putting that base mount back in. The washer has to be outside. So now that everything's together, we'll replace the cover and we'll give it a try. Okay, well this looks like another successful repair. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And hopefully you found this video informative and you'll be able to repair your Starbase Defense Gun as well. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll find you on the next video.